What if someone tried to warn the world about one of the deadliest days in modern history before it even happened? Not after, not as a theory, not as a conspiracy, but before the planes took off, before the towers fell, before the world changed forever. And what if nobody listened? Because sometimes the scariest stories aren't about what happened, they're about what could have been prevented. Welcome to AM Story Archives.
Some stories were never meant to be found. Some truths were buried for a reason.
It started in the summer of 2001, long before headlines, long before chaos, long before fear took over the skies. There was a man named Daniel Harper. He wasn't famous. He wasn't powerful. He didn't work for any intelligence agency. In fact, Daniel was the kind of man people often overlooked. A quiet systems analyst living in New Jersey, late 30s, divorced, no kids, a routine life built on logic, patterns, and data. But Daniel had one unusual habit. He paid attention to things most people ignored. Daniel worked for a mid-sized logistics company. His job involved analyzing shipping patterns, airline cargo routes, and transportation data. It was boring work to most, but to Daniel, it was a puzzle. He noticed trends, repetition, irregularities. And in early June 2001, something started to feel wrong. At first, it was subtle. A few unusual cargo reroutes. Flights that were typically half-empty suddenly showing full cargo capacity without clear documentation. Private charter bookings that didn't match seasonal demand. Nothing illegal, nothing obvious, just off. Daniel tried to ignore it, but he couldn't, because the patterns weren't random. They were coordinated. By late June, Daniel had filled an entire notebook. Dates, flight numbers, airport codes, small notes scribbled in the margins. JFK, Newark, Boston Logan. The same airports kept appearing. And then there were the names. Not passengers. Daniel didn't have access to that, but organizations. Small companies, shell corporations, repeated bookings under slightly different identities. To anyone else, it looked like coincidence. To Daniel, it looked like preparation. He began staying late at work, running deeper analyses, cross-referencing data, and that's when he noticed something that made his stomach drop. Several flights scheduled in September showed unusual overlaps. Flights that shared similar departure windows, unusual routing adjustments, and identical booking patterns. It was as if someone was mapping out a sequence, not for efficiency, but for timing. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in his apartment staring at pages of data spread across his table, his mind racing. What does this mean? What am I looking at? He wasn't paranoid. He was logical. And logically, this didn't make sense, unless it wasn't supposed to. The next morning, Daniel did something he had never done before. He reported it. He started small, an internal report to his supervisor, a summary of irregular logistics patterns and potential coordinated anomalies. His boss glanced at it and shrugged. Probably just corporate restructuring. Airlines change routes all the time. Daniel tried to explain, tried to show the patterns, but his boss had already moved on. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't, because Daniel couldn't let it go. Over the next 2 weeks, he escalated. Emails to regional analysts, messages to aviation regulatory offices, even a detailed report sent anonymously to a federal tip line. No response, no follow-up, nothing. By mid-July, Daniel started to doubt himself. Maybe he was overthinking. Maybe it was just coincidence. But then, something happened. On July 18th, Daniel received a reply. Not from an official agency, not from his company, but from an unknown email address. The message was short. Stop looking into this. You're misinterpreting normal data. No signature, no explanation, just that. Most people would have been relieved, told themselves, okay, I was wrong. But Daniel felt the opposite, because if it was nothing, why tell him to stop? That night, he went deeper, breaking rules he had never broken before, accessing restricted data sets, looking at patterns he wasn't authorized to see, and what he found terrified him.
There were clusters of one-way bookings. Multiple individuals booked separately, but on the same flights. No return trips. No luggage records tied to cargo. And the destinations, always major cities, always high-traffic routes. Daniel felt a cold realization creeping in. This wasn't about cargo. This wasn't about logistics. This was something else, something human, something planned. He started connecting the dots. Multiple flights, coordinated timing, one-way passengers, major cities. And then, a date started to emerge. September. Not a specific day, not yet, but everything seemed to be building toward that month, like a clock ticking down without a visible timer. Daniel knew he needed help, real help, so he did something drastic. He printed everything, every chart, every anomaly, every note, and he drove to Washington, D.C. He didn't have an appointment, he didn't have a contact, he just had a folder and a growing sense of urgency. At the first office he visited, security turned him away. At the second, they accepted his documents, but made no promises. At the third, they didn't even let him finish explaining. Sir, we receive thousands of reports like this. There's no indication of a credible threat. Daniel tried to argue, tried to explain the patterns, but he was just one man, with data no one wanted to see. By early August, Daniel was exhausted, mentally, emotionally. He had done everything he could, and nothing had changed. But then, something shifted. On August 23rd, Daniel noticed a final pattern, one he had somehow missed. All the suspicious flights, they weren't just connected by timing, they were connected by type. Specific aircraft models, specific seating capacities, specific fuel ranges. And when he overlaid that data with route maps, he saw it. Lines. Invisible lines connecting cities. Intersecting paths, converging trajectories. It wasn't random, it was geometric. And at the center of those intersections was New York City. Daniel's hands started shaking, because now it wasn't a theory anymore, it was a possibility, a horrifying, unthinkable possibility. He wrote one final report, more detailed than anything before, clear, direct, urgent. This may involve coordinated hijackings or deliberate aircraft misuse targeting major urban centers. Immediate investigation recommended. He sent it everywhere, every agency he could find, every contact, every address. And then he waited. Days passed. No response. September arrived. On September 10th, Daniel barely slept. He couldn't explain why, but something felt close, like standing on the edge of something you can't see, but know is there. The next morning, September 11th, 2001, Daniel turned on the TV, just like any other day, coffee in hand, mind still racing from weeks of stress. And then, everything stopped. A breaking news alert. A plane had hit one of the towers.
Daniel froze, his heart pounding. "No," he whispered. Then the second plane hit, and in that moment Daniel knew. Every pattern, every anomaly, every warning, it had all been real, and no one had stopped it. The days that followed were a blur. Shock, grief, confusion, a nation trying to understand what had just happened. Daniel sat in silence, watching, listening, remembering every email, every ignored report. He didn't feel anger, not at first, just emptiness. Because the hardest truth wasn't that something terrible happened, it was that he saw it coming and couldn't make anyone else see it. Months later, Daniel stopped trying to explain. He stopped sending reports, stopped analyzing patterns. He moved away, changed jobs, started a quieter life. But he never forgot. Years later, someone asked him a simple question. If you knew again, would you try to warn people? Daniel thought for a long time. Then he said, yes. Even if no one listened, he nodded. Because sometimes doing the right thing isn't about the outcome. It's about the attempt. Ending message, lesson. Not every warning comes from a loud voice. Not every truth comes from authority. And not every pattern is coincidence. Sometimes the difference between disaster and prevention is whether someone chooses to listen. So the next time something feels off, a pattern doesn't make sense, or someone tries to warn you about something others ignore, don't dismiss it too quickly. Because history isn't just shaped by what happens, it's shaped by what people choose to believe and what they choose to ignore. If this story made you think, comment your thoughts below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to AM Story Archives for more powerful stories like this, because the next story might be even more unbelievable than this one.